Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, October 14th, 2024, and today Gallup released brand new data about the party affiliation of voters across the United States and specific numbers related to independent voters that in their line of questioning, in their line that was, as of today, do you lean more towards the Democratic Party or the Republican Party? The Democrats have now reclaimed their lead of a 4-point advantage, the largest we have seen for the Democratic Party in the 2024 election year and the largest we have seen with Kamala Harris on the ballot. A 4-point advantage that seemingly has turned around from the numbers in September that gave Republicans a 5-point advantage back then. That was a big change from some of the data we had been seeing in the months of August and even in July when we saw a huge surge in favor of Donald Trump's candidacy. Even then, to see that roughly on par with the September numbers really didn't make that much sense. But it makes a lot more sense when we're starting to see things come back towards Kamala Harris when it comes down to the issue of party affiliation, because that's largely what every other national poll had been telling us. Gallup seemed to be the only naysayer, and now they're in line with the average that we've been seeing across battleground states and across our national figures. And this advantage here for Democrats is something that I do think really is a mixed bag. On one end, I do think that it is obviously important for Democrats that they are running largely in line with that of the 2020 results, which had a 5-point advantage for Democrats right through Election Day, 48 to 43, an overall trend that was pretty strong for Democrats that resulted in Democrats winning the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And looking at the numbers for 2024, they only seem to be underperforming it ever so slightly, which in the grand scheme of things isn't too bad for Kamala Harris. And a big reason why it isn't too bad is because we have been seeing things similar like this happen in recent elections, in off-year and midterm years where the independent vote doesn't actually need to be as beneficial to the Democratic Party as we otherwise would have thought, basing it alone on the 2020 election. But here's where it really does matter. When you're looking at the 2024 data and you're looking at the state data from 2022, independent voters only narrowly went to Democrats in 2022. And no, it might be surprising knowing how the Senate results ended up. Democrats won the governorships in more governor races in 2022 than 2018. The Senate races, Democrats won Arizona by 5, Georgia by 3, Pennsylvania by 5. They were running up the numbers in the battleground Senate races. The 2022 numbers just say the Democrats won the independent party ID vote share, according to CNN's exit polls, which is one of the more accurate exit polling groups across the country. Democrats only won them by 2 points. So today, with an advantage of roughly 4 points, it absolutely is something that Democrats can look at and say, we have made improvements off the 2022 election year. But what we know is that 2022 can't be identical to the 2024 cycle. Otherwise, they run the risk of losing the presidency. And allow me to explain. When you're looking at a place like Wisconsin in 2022, this is a better indicator of how an electorate that isn't as excited to vote for Democrats can still ultimately end up with Republican victories, even with shining beacons for Democrats like Pennsylvania and Arizona and Georgia. Good examples of how Democrats, when excited and enthusiastic and also paired with the wrong type of GOP candidate in the state, it can result in Democrats winning. But in Wisconsin, Ron Johnson still narrowly edged it out. In North Carolina, Republicans still narrowly edged it out. They won in Florida by 17 points. They won in Ohio by 6 points. They won in Iowa by 12 points. These things happened, right? And in some cases, massively outperformed that of Trump's margin in the 2020 election. And so Democrats are constantly looking, while 2022 might be a standard model of how you can win despite not having all the national figures on their side, they'd obviously like to win by more than 2022. They'd like to win Wisconsin this cycle. They'd like to win North Carolina. That's why they're investing tens of millions of dollars in these battleground states. And so when I see numbers like this, it sort of reassures Democrats, I think, that they have been making improvements with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. Better than the numbers in July, better than the numbers in August, certainly better than the numbers in September, and now they have their best performing data points released on Gallup here, which is strong for the Democratic Party, and it is strong in its own right, and I think something that we will find to be quite interesting as we continue through the remainder of the 2024 election. And in the final 3 weeks, final 3 weeks, we will be in a very interesting place when it comes down to how independents, not Democrats, not Republicans, but independents will be swaying voters back and forth on the statewide level and on the national level. The election has largely been pretty stagnant over the past 3 weeks. 538's 2024 forecast here, not forecast, polling average just shows Kamala Harris with a 2.4% advantage. A month ago on September 14th, that was a 6% advantage. A month prior to that, in August 16th, let's go ahead and look at that. I guess I just got completely thrown off. September 14th was 2.6%. August 14th was, 2.6%. I mean, we are really roughly on par with exactly where we have been. This election has been just as close from the very beginning. Have there been some movements in favor of Donald Trump? The answer is yes. But on the overall average, it actually hasn't shifted that heavy. We're hyper-focusing on individual polls that do show good signs for Trump, good signs for Harris on the overall, which are things that we can definitely talk about and discuss, as we did in the videos yesterday, talking about those good polls for Donald Trump and shifts. But still overall, keeping this election just as close and contentious as it was, it overall is just a very stagnant race. And the Gallup numbers here sort of reaffirm the Democrats still maintained that national advantage. It didn't really make sense that they were down 5 points nationally, but winning this national popular vote, unless we were missing something about the Republican electorate, which we can now see in the new Gallup data, we probably weren't. When it comes down to the 538 forecast, again, election is competitive. It's just another day, in America, right? 54-46. Kamala Harris in the advantage, still under 60%. No candidate has reached that point, with limited exceptions, I think maybe a week. Kamala Harris was hovering around 60 pretty consistently, got up to 64 at her highest point. Never at all the numbers we saw in 2016 or 2020 for the Democratic candidates here. Overall, though, this race really is coming down to the wire. The battleground states are being decided by less than a point. You can see it on the battleground state margins here. Nevada is even. Wisconsin is 1 point. Pennsylvania is 1 point. Michigan is 1 point. North Carolina is 1 point. Georgia is 1 point. Arizona is 2 points. We have never seen an election like this in the 21st century, and we felt the 2000 presidential election and how close it was. Even if you weren't born during that time, I'm one of those people, how close that race was. And based on what we're seeing for people who have experienced both the 2000 election and this one, they say this one's closer. The people who have been political commentators for decades on end, they say this race is the closest race they've ever watched. And honestly speaking, it very much feels that way when we're constantly looking at data points like this. But Democrats do have a bit of a silver lining in this Gallup data, in that if independents do in fact break for the Democratic Party in a way that's a 4-point advantage, it outpaces their numbers in their most recent cycle, which is the first election since Roe v. Wade was overturned. It was the first real race where voters of all different types were, shifting back and forth between how they were supporting Democrats, supporting Republicans. And what it really did here for the Democratic Party was it benefited them because independents and those who identified as moderate voters, you can see that here when it comes down to ideology, it's about a 15-point advantage for Democrats amongst those who identify as moderates. 15-point advantage. These are really good things for the Democratic Party. These are really good things because they're looking at these numbers and they're saying, based on how Republicans have portrayed themselves in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade, the aftermath of all of these different Supreme Court decisions, to many voters, they seem extreme. To many voters, they seem out of touch. To many voters, they seem like people who shouldn't be in governing offices, shouldn't be governors, shouldn't be U.S. reps, shouldn't be U.S. senators, and it could very well apply to the presidential ballot. It might kind of fuel this rejection of that Republican brand amongst independents. I mean, clearly something has to change from a point in July where there was a 6-point advantage for Republicans amongst those who wanted to identify as Republicans versus now, because the brand has probably gotten increasingly more toxic for these independent voters, right? You can also find, too, that just by the nature of who they're polling, obviously, absolutely, things can swing. But on that note, too, you might find that Kamala Harris has introduced a new type of Democratic politics the Democrats are now rallying independents behind. Think about all of these new announcements we're seeing from the Kamala Harris campaign that is clearly an intentional effort here to try to replicate this, margin of support the Democrats held in 2020 because the Republican brand was branded as too toxic and too extreme, right? Donald Trump was a bad president because he was too extreme. Donald Trump was a bad president because he was too conspiracy theories. Donald Trump was a bad president because of X, Y, and Z. That is the way the Democratic Party messaged, and it worked very well amongst independent voters. They responded to that and said, I don't affiliate as a Republican. Not only did they vote for Biden, but Democrats won back control of the United States Senate. They flipped Georgia's both Senate seats, right? They flipped Arizona from red to blue. And so you were finding consistently that Democrats were able to win that messaging correctly. And I think that's what they're starting to do now. It's a combination of factors. Kamala Harris plays a big part of it. Ultimately, though, the Democratic Party being in a better position than they were a month ago, a better position than they were 2 months ago, a better position than they were 3 months ago, and the best position when it comes down to party ID number since Kamala Harris has been introduced into the race is something you can't ignore. It's a good thing for the Democratic Party, no matter how you try to cut it. And although this race is still going to be close, if it is won on the margins, which it will be won by, you have to look to those independent voters that gave Democrats these electoral victories in 2022. Think about those independent voters in Arizona that might not have liked Katie Hobbs' campaign style, which is why they might not have responded in polls and saying, I'm voting for Katie Hobbs. Why were it that, this was incorrectly predicted by FiveThirtyEight, by all these major forecasting sites, by Real Clear Politics? Everybody got it wrong. Nobody got Arizona correctly. And Katie Hobbs was underperforming in the polls. Independents weren't backing her. People weren't saying they were associated with her. And Kari Lake still was just as toxic as she is today as a Senate candidate, if not more toxic as a gubernatorial candidate. But it allowed these independent voters, is what we saw in the exit polling data, to ignore the polls and say, maybe they didn't have a decision then, or maybe they quietly did, rejecting Kari Lake at the ballot box was what they actually intended on doing. They might not have sent it to the pollsters, they might not have gone to rallies, they might not have donated, but we found out on election night that voters rejected Kari Lake because largely you can see this in the data, you can see this in focus groups, you can see this in messaging, that voters found Kari Lake to be too extreme. And it was a winning strategy not only in Arizona, it was a winning strategy across the country. It was a winning strategy in Trump plus 17 Kansas. It was a winning strategy in the state of Maine. It was a winning strategy in Biden plus 2.8 Michigan that turned into Democrats plus 10.6. It was a winning strategy in states like New Mexico. It was a winning strategy across the country in Oregon, where Republicans had a genuine shot at flipping the governorship for the first time in a very long time. Democrats still ended up pulling out ahead despite an independent who previously was a Democrat who wanted to be the Democratic nominee here, decided to run as an independent. Tina Kotek ended up becoming the governor. In Pennsylvania, it was a winning strategy. In Wisconsin, a more impressive victory here because, again, similar to that of Arizona, the polls missed the mark on this one too in predicting that Tim Michels would win. Then he was branded as this extremist. Not only did he lose, he lost by roughly 4 points. And that's largely what these polls had missed. What the voters, what people didn't understand about the state of the race because they weren't seeing it from the lens of these independent voters and they weren't giving the answers to the pundits and the pollsters that gave an accurate depiction of the race. And so when independent voters are already voluntarily choosing to say, I more identify with the Democratic Party than the Republican Party, that stands in contrast with a response they might have given a month ago or 2 months ago or 3 months ago, or certainly throughout the entire time when it was Biden versus Trump, that matters for the Democratic Party and really puts them in a genuinely good position when it comes down to the 2024 cycle, and I really am not shocked by that. I think the Democratic campaign has done a good job at keeping that extremist branding someone like J.D. Vance as weird, associating Project 2025 with Donald Trump because it was Donald Trump's advisors who wrote Project 2025. You have all of these different things that are happening all at once that are building out this image of the Republican Party that isn't landing well amongst voters, and you are seeing it when it comes down to how people self-identify. And what I am also interested in too is a lot of these off elections, that these special elections or these off-year elections that are regularly scheduled that give us data and give us real substantive election results that can inform our election predictions and inform our electoral understanding. And all of the signs point to a Kamala Harris victory. I kid you not. You can look at it from no matter how you try to find it from a partisan lens. When you look at special elections in Congress, Democrats have been improving nearly across all of these special elections with very, very, very limited exceptions. When it comes down to off-year elections, look at governor races, look at state legislative races, Democrats have been winning back. They won back a chamber in the state of Virginia. They won a governorship in the state of Kentucky. They've been winning a lot of these ballot initiatives. They've been winning where they need to win. You can also see it too across the country in mayoral races, in primaries, where voters are getting out in partisan ways, like Washington, which has been a predictor of November elections for years upon years upon years. This time, they're saying the electorate is even more blue than 2022 when Democrats won across the country in these battleground states pretty substantively. And it indicates the Democrats might be on track to do similarly in the presidential race. There are plenty of metrics out there, and this is another one that really adds into it. Independent voters, when pushed to make a decision, which is a huge portion of the country, 42%, a high right now for quite some time, 42% of these voters here say that they identify as an independent. It's not an all-time high. It certainly has been higher, but as of late, it is a higher point. Democrats hovering around exactly where they were back in August, their highest point when it was, June, it was 23%, July, it was 28%, it's higher up at 31%, Republican at the lowest point they've been, more people moving over to independent, more people moving over to Democrat. That's a good thing for the Democratic Party, and again, pushing that 42% to make a decision. When you combine the vote share here, when you combine the affiliation, you're going to find the Democrats do come out ahead. Democrats come out with that majority of the public identifying when push comes to shove as a Democrat, and a majority wins elections. And it leads to that point too, that Kamala Harris's lead nationally isn't fabricated. It's not something that is, historically inaccurate. This is not historically inaccurate, just widely inaccurate. This is very real. And that's how Democrats win the election, should they win the election. And all this doom and gloom around the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris's candidacy, just take a look again at these metrics. Start off where we were when Kamala Harris entered into the race, a 0.8% advantage. Take a look at where we were 2 months ago, August 14th, 2024. Harris led by 2.6. And then in September 14th, 2024, Harris led by 2.6. And today, she leads by 2.4%. An overall shift of just 0.2%. This race is close, competitive, and a very, very fascinating one to watch. And ultimately, Kamala Harris has maintained her advantage pretty consistently over the past 3 months. And what we will find between now and Election Day independents will make or break this race for both candidates. And right now it seems the Democrats pull slightly away on top, which is just enough to make up those margins to allow Democrats another 4 years in the White House with Kamala Harris as president. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.